on. Archit, it's great to finally have you on the show. We've been talking about it for some time, man.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah. Well, you're originally, or I don't know originally, but you typically live in Austin, Texas, and
Yeah,
you're in
that's
San
right.
Diego now. We couldn't make the in-person thing work. Bad setup for, we're not set up for, 3+ folks, but I know you wanted to come in here, so you would have been the first guest we had in the new studio. But
Well, if you're still in San Diego or you come back to San Diego when we finally do get our studio rearranged the way we really envision it, then we will definitely have you back.
for sure.
Maybe I can still be first, is what you're saying.
That's okay. Yeah.
Maybe you can still be first.
There's
Yeah.
always a chance.
What's up, everybody? You're listening to the Hustle and Flowchart podcast with your boys, Matt Wolf and Joe Fear.
Well, give us a scoop, because like this is we're chatting like you don't do podcasts, which is cool, like it's almost like that's a rarity for us. So it's like, ooh, okay, where are we gonna go? It's like a mystery conversation.
Yeah. We're so used to getting the people that are on the podcast circuit right now that have told the same story 17 times. So it's like awesome to kind of go with someone fresh. I'm not going to say what I was going to say because it is a dirty reference, but
I'm like, where are you going with this,
yeah,
man?
I won't say it. But no, let's dig in a little bit. So you were working at Facebook, right? Between about 2017, 2020, for a few years
Yeah.
you were at Facebook, working with consumer products, basically like physical goods, e-commerce, and also offline companies. Let's talk a little bit about like what it was like working at Facebook. I'm just curious, like what was the culture like? Did you go into the Facebook offices every day, or was it like a work at home thing? Like what was your experience like there?
Totally. Yeah. So I was at Facebook in Austin for just about 3 years. It was actually my first job out of college, which was pretty interesting. I had done a couple odd things here and there, but this was like the first real role I had, and very much like an interesting experience of corporate America. Facebook moves very differently from a company like IBM or a more traditional company. The culture is really young, especially in Austin. It's probably average age at that office is probably 27 or so. So it's a lot of like young folks, a lot of just like talk around e-commerce, future of tech, future of work, like all this kind of stuff that maybe has become a little more normalized in the past year or so, but was pretty new in 2017. And very much felt just like a group of, honestly, like a group of young folks who are just trying to do something good in the world. If you put enough good people in a room together, something good is going to come out of that. So I have a lot of thoughts on Facebook, on positive impact, negative impact for the world, all that stuff. To me, it kind of boils down to, if you have 20,000 people in a company and 17,000 of them really believe they can do something genuinely amazing for the world, something good is going to come out of that. So that's kind of what I subscribe to.
So you spent a few years there, and you were working, was it like in the advertising kind of space? Because CPG products, right?
Yeah, so I worked with CPG companies, really anything sold in retail or online, and worked with around 30 or so scale-ups and their agency partners and other vendors and stuff. And really the goal was to be their best digital point of contact. So when they look at their relationship with Facebook, they go, oh yeah, those guys didn't just help me with Facebook ads. They helped me with CRO. They helped me with creative strategy. They helped me think through how to structure my team. And so it just makes sense for me to invest here. Wow. So it was a pretty interesting model in that there was a lot of onus on the individual contributor. It was kind of like, hey, you have to go and impact these people's businesses. Do that in whatever way you think is best. Wow. And that level of like empowerment, I think was really exciting and really compelling for me.
Was that like did you have some prior, well, you said it was right out of college or university for you. So was it like a ton of on the job kind of learning to navigate all this?
It was, yeah. It was a lot of like trial by fire, to be honest. And I mean, they have a pretty good onboarding system where I spent like 3 months learning from the head of CPG and one of my mentors there, Alicia, who was just like phenomenal. And I learned like 80% of what I know now from the two of them. Wow. So there was a lot of really strong support there. But yeah, it was a little bit of just kind of thrown into the flames and, see what happens.
What was like the most unexpected thing, I guess, like from working there, like a takeaway that you're like, holy crap, I didn't think I was going to do that or that would happen.
Yeah. I mean, just the whole journey. So I actually wanted to work at Facebook because of a very academic reason. I majored in English. I was super interested in the stories we tell ourselves and how people kind of narrativize their lives and all this stuff. And I was interested in how Facebook was changing the structure of language. and the way that we communicate. Even things like memes and emojis are like new ways of transferring meaning that we haven't really seen like pre-tech. Kind of like hieroglyphics or something, if you have to harken it back to something. But the meaning is, I can go on for this for a while. But so that was my initial interest. And so I approached Facebook. I interviewed there for an internship, and they were like, look, you have some pretty interesting thoughts about all this stuff, which is cool, but you really have no experience in marketing or tech or anything relevant. So I went out and collected that experience, still with the goal of this kind of academic, I'm going to go do a PhD and kind of understand from a critical lens, like the impact of this kind of technology on language. When I got to Facebook, my whole kind of world shifted, and I became really interested in how we connect with our goals through brands and products, and how marketing is less so about trying to sell people something and more so about enabling a shift they want to see in their lives through a product. And so with that kind of mentality switch, I think it opened up a lot of like what I'm doing now and what I'm hoping to do in the future and all this kind of stuff. In a way that before I wasn't really oriented against. I would say I had a much smaller like purview of why I was here, like what my interests were. So that was the biggest thing for me. I think probably one of the most interesting things was just seeing what creates success in a company like this. Facebook is really like algorithmically driven, but despite that, at the end of the day, it's really just about the team. If you have a really strong team behind what you're doing, and you can give them the ownership to remove yourself from the weeds, from the day-to-day at every level of the business, just trying to remove yourself and empower other folks to rise to that occasion. That's really what turns into like a flywheel of success where momentum builds and you move faster. And, Facebook has had this crazy growth, and that really comes down to incentivizing the team in the right way. So that was pretty interesting for me too.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like you don't really see them as like this big evil corporation that like all the documentaries are trying to to spin them as right now.
Social dilemmas and whatnot.
I think I was in this unique position of like when a lot of this stuff came out, I was at Facebook, and so I got to hear kind of both sides and see what was happening internally. And I when I got to Facebook, I was looking into this really critically. I was like, where are the tech decks about listening to people's phones? I know it's out here. I know they're doing it. Like I'm like searching in the internal wiki where all information is available to everybody. Wow. Like tapping the API, like listening to people's phones, like all these keywords. And the closest thing I found was this article that said, we technically can't do this because it'll zap people's battery life and they'll notice that their phone died in 20 minutes.
That's a good point. Never thought of that.
Well, and I also heard there's literally no data center on the planet large enough to hold all that data.
Yeah, it's like, where are they putting all of this? So, I think like a lot of this stuff to me is, there are definitely negative secondary implications of Facebook, but a lot of it is blown out of proportion a little bit in the same way that new tech is always blown out of proportion. And when TV came along, we all thought it was going to turn our kids into zombies, and fast forward 40 years and there's no zombies on Earth, and video games came out and everyone thought it's going to lead to more mass shootings and all this crazy stuff. And there was actually no correlation there either. And so there's been this kind of, at every stage, this like tendency to push back against technological progress. And I think the same thing kind of happens with social media to an extent.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what was, so it was 3 years there. Did you have like a calling to move on from Facebook, since that seemed like that was your dream job? So like, did something happen that like pivoted in your mind? You're like, there's more.
Yeah, I think two things happened. So one, as I started to get really deep with these early stage companies, I just got more and more interested in the operational and execution side of it. I was like, look, it's great to be advising them on the strategy and working with them on this marketing. And then ultimately someone else has to execute that idea. Yeah. And oftentimes there's a disconnect between what we recommend and what we see in market that comes to life. It's like, oh, this is the ad campaign you guys made with these ideas. Like it doesn't really track to what we're talking about. But so that was one piece, was just wanting to get deeper with the companies that I found really compelling, which were mostly early stage, like 7-figure, early 8-figure businesses, still trying to find their product market fit. And then the second piece was just, I started to see my learning getting a little bit tapered. And I started to think more critically about the path that I was on, and got to this stage where it was like, okay, if I stick on this corporate path, I'll probably learn 20% new things at every stage, because 80% will be my core role that I have to be good at to be paid to do it. So where can I go do something where 80% of what I'm doing is net new and I'm learning? Well, probably no one's going to pay me to figure it out. So that kind of led me to, okay, well, I got to do something on my own if that's the pace of learning that I'm looking for. So that was like a big shift for me in just thinking about like, what are my goals in the next 5-10 years, getting super clear on that, and then turning that into more of like a roadmap for what I should be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think because there's of the limited stuff you have online about you, which is awesome, by the way, is like you have this thing on, you wrote your story out on LinkedIn, and I read that you started a flower delivery service on the side, like in I guess your night hours or something, when you weren't working well, it was during the same time you had the Facebook job, right?
Yeah, I actually started it like about a year before I left Facebook. And yeah, it was really just evenings, weekends, like whenever I was not doing at lunch break, responding to customers on my phone, like just, really whatever I could do to kind of make it work. And that's why I went into that. I was really looking for, where can I learn today? Where can I immediately get my feet wet with e-commerce and kind of a subscription-based business or something like that? And I settled on a flower delivery service because I had a lot of ideas. I had ideas around skincare and all this stuff, but they all required like a 2-year lead time to develop product. And flowers was the only thing where I called a local farmer and I said, hey, I have this idea. It's subscription local blooms delivered within Austin. We can keep it super local and expose you to this whole new market, because your only customer right now is Whole Foods. And there's this huge D2C flower business going on. And he was interested. So I had a product in hand. Within a week, I launched a website just to kind of validate. And then within probably 10 days or so, I had my first 3 or 4 paying customers. And so the business was kind of born before I even had a business model, which is probably not the best way to do it in retrospect. Right. But, again, following this theme of like trial by fire, I just kind of jumped into it and said, hey, like now it's a thing. We have customers who expect flowers every month. We have to service them. Let's build something around this.
Did you ever use Facebook advertising during the flower business?
I did. Yeah, that's how I got the bulk of customers. And thankfully, I knew what I was doing, and it was still, not really early days at all, but there was still a lot of like underpriced inventory on Facebook. And so, yeah, we got our first like probably couple hundred customers just through Facebook marketing before moving into anything else like Google or organic even or anything like that.
Yeah, and you scaled the thing. I think you wrote to 20K per month, so it was MRR. So you must have had relationships with vendors or people out there that was kind of like a recurring element, right? Or was that like one-off?
Yeah, no, it was. So it was a recurring model. So we had both bi-weekly deliveries and monthly deliveries. We actually expanded to Austin and San Antonio. For a startup, this is pretty small. For a local business built in a year, I think this got some pretty good traction.
For sure.
And that's where I was kind of interested, is like, a subscription business, you don't necessarily need to have this churn and burn like 8,000 customers. And you guys kind of know this being on the content side, like you can have 1,000 or 2,000 customers and have a pretty nice business going that's profitable, makes sense for everybody. And that's kind of the stage we got it to. We were doing, I think, like $250K in annual run rate, all recurring revenue, had over 90% retention. And it was like pretty stable. So that was the really exciting part of it. The not so exciting part was me waking up one day and going, wow, there's a whole logistical headache here waiting for me every morning when I get up, of inventory that's going to go bad in 2 days, and we have to find the demand to meet it, and all this kind of stuff.
While you're working a full-time job.
Yeah, well,
Jesus. Yeah, I keep thinking of it because it, like, just the ending of it seems like with that story was like what you had to do a bunch of deliveries, and then what you quickly realized, or maybe it wasn't so quickly, you're like, okay, this maybe wasn't built correctly, with the end in mind, it sounded like.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I had started down this path that was kind of twofold. On the one hand, I was really interested in the cash flow side of my business, but on the other hand, I also wanted to scale, and those things didn't really work together. So when this really happened, I realized this when we opened up San Antonio. We had a new market. I was pretty much driving out, and at this point I'd quit Facebook to do this full time. I was driving out to San Antonio probably 2 or 3 times a week, which is like a 2-hour drive. So it's like 4 hours, total, 3 times a weck. This is like starting to kind of to weigh on me, just to get inventory to San Diego from our farms in Austin.
Yeah.
And then go out and, hand it to the drivers and do all this kind of stuff. And I just kind of woke up and realized, like, where we're headed is that we need fundraising. We need to get some investors on board so we can build unique logistical infrastructure in every city in the US so that we can scale this. Because the fact that it's local means that you need local farms or some kind of local growing operation, maybe it's hydroponics or something. And then you need local delivery infrastructure that we're also building and owning. And then you need a local consumer base and marketing that goes with that. And so you're essentially building the same business 100 times in order to capture market share across the US. And I still think this is a really cool model if someone wants to go do this and pivot it into like a local farmers market delivered. There's like, I think, a huge opportunity there to connect local produce and farms with consumers in the area. But I didn't want to be the guy who was building this infrastructure across the US and spending all my time fundraising as opposed to running my business, and also trying to find people who could build the local infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, this happened over a few months, but it really led to a lot of like cognitive kind of like backlash or something, where I'd be in one place thinking about my goals and realizing that my daily actions were not actually laddering up to those goals. So I got pretty clear on what I wanted in the next 5 to 10 years. And that eventually led to me going, okay, well, it doesn't make sense for me to do anything except for close this business right now, because it's not actually laddering up to those goals. And the path that I'm going down is an interesting and potentially very successful and fruitful path, but it's not the one I want to be on.
Dang, that takes some balls to just shut it down. You didn't sell it or
yeah,
find a buyer or anything.
I didn't sell it. I didn't find a new CEO. I mean, I tried that for about a month, and I saw the roadmap. I was like, okay, I can spend 5 months here and find someone to fill my shoes.
Yeah.
But do I want to do that? And I think ultimately where I went is I'll trust myself to figure it out in retrospect and be able to tell the right story and, you know, make all of this worth it.
Nice.
And it ultimately became like the best experience I could have for my next business. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I went about the close of the business, was just let me trust myself to figure it out in retrospect, tell the right story, and make sense of this with 6 months gap between now and where I want to be.
So was that business running when you left Facebook, or was there like some overlap where you were still running the flower business and starting your agency? Yeah,
there was actually. So I had just left Facebook. The business was doing pretty well. I wanted to keep all of the money in Friendly Flower because I just, you know, I know for a inventory-based business, there's like cash needs, and I wanted to preserve that. And so I started doing some freelance just to pay rent and, you know, do all the things that humans do in their lives, hang out with my girlfriend, all this kind of stuff. And I had 2 or 3 clients. And then I think it got to the stage where I was like, hey, look, our clients really like us. I love this work. It's pretty clear how it maps back to the 3 goals that I know I have for the next 10 years. You know, why am I doing this other thing? And so that kind of moment of realization happened, I would say, very slowly for 6 months. And then like all at once, it was like, there's no other option than to just close the business. And I think that tends to be how I make these kinds of non-reversible critical decisions, is think for a 6-month window and then pull the trigger.
So you kind of get all the data, you get all the information you need. You're probably like getting the bumps and bruises along the way, driving too far, managing stuff you don't want to do. And you're just like, yep, I thought of this and nope.
Yeah, I mean, it was like driver doesn't show up. I'm on the road delivering flowers because someone has to do it. They need to get out today or they're going to go bad. Oh, by the way, I have a client call starting in 30 minutes. Let me take that from the road. And I've memorized these metrics in the morning so I can speak to my client. And like, you know, there was a lot of cognitive load going on.
Well, that's actually something you hit it on the head with, like taking these actions that don't align with goals. That's something Matt and I have been really looking at ourselves a lot lately, because I think there's a lot of there's a lot of actions we just don't think about that are kind of just subconsciously happening, even though we might be doing them. But even subconsciously, we have all of these things circle in our minds that we probably aren't choosing to think of, but they're weighing on us, you know?
Yeah, and this is my big kind of problem. I guess problem's a strong word, but my issue with like hustle culture or side hustles is like, if you get to a point where you really believe in something, you shouldn't have a side hustle, because it's just going to take mental capacity away from what you really want to be doing. And so I think side hustles is fine. I think it's fine to diversify your effort and have something in multiple baskets. But when you know that something is really, you know, going to take the cake and is really important to you, that's when I think you should just double down with your time and your resources and, you know, have that alignment of like, I trust myself to really be good at this one thing. And I think today, like, optionality is like a big emphasis that people have, is, you know, I want to keep my options open. But that actually leads to stagnation, because you're always going to be in the 101 phase. You can never devote enough time to anything, you know? So I really believe in like, try a few things, figure out what you're doing, and just go after it for 5 years.
Dude, that's damn good advice.
Mm-hmm.
It's like hard, difficult medicine, I think, for a lot of people to take down, though, especially if like you're so curious or you know you have the abilities, or you want to help someone out, like whatever the motivation is.
Totally. And, you know, I think all founders, like everyone in this kind of solopreneurs, whatever, everyone in this kind of position, there's probably an inclination you have towards the shiny object syndrome,
Sure.
which I know is very true for me. And so I think it's like, and that is an inherent optimism that I think is really exciting about the startup world. But to me, it's like constantly checking myself and going, hey, I know this thing is cool and exciting, but I really need to be focused on this, because it ladders up to making a great network of like-minded founders, you know, building my cash position, or whatever else like my top 3 goals are for the next few years.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just listening to an episode by Noah Kagan, which you may actually know because he was out in Austin and worked for Facebook for a little while. But
long before you, I think he was like, what?
Oh yeah, he was like, I don't know, he was an early.
Yeah, I think he might have got more equity than I did.
Yeah. But anyway, he was talking about something very similar. He was basically saying how like all these opportunities are flowing to him all the time, and he could pursue them all, and he could probably even make more money if he wanted to do it. But he's like, I just want to put all my mental power on AppSumo. Like everything else, I put my blinders onto everything else, and I just go all in on AppSumo. I know I can move the needle there, and anything else is just kind of a distraction. And it's, you know, it sounds like you kind of have a similar philosophy, and I think that's a philosophy we've just kind of recently landed on, which took us too long to figure out. But
too excitable over here with the shiny objects.
Yeah.
So tell us about what Reach Digital does now, your current agency. What's the business model? What do people hire you to do?
So we're a boutique growth firm, primarily for D2Cs. So we do a little bit of digital product and some other stuff, but mostly it's e-commerce brands looking to scale to, you know, let's call it something like mid 8 figures. So we're mostly working with late 6-figure, early to mid 7-figure brands. So anywhere from, you know, call it like 500K to 7 million in revenue per year. And they're really looking to become like leaders in the market. So they're looking for quick growth, really trying at that stage, it's about like trying to narrow in on product market fit and make sure you really have something that works. And then secondly, finding go-to-market fit and how do we show up in different channels to our target audience and show them a lot of value and acquire customers and all that good stuff. So mostly we do that through paid acquisition, through Facebook, Google, all these kinds of channels, and through creative. So content production and you know, post-production, everything that entails, creative strategy.
No, I like the way you present everything on the page itself too. Is essentially, well, like one of the first things I noticed was the copyright at the very bottom. It was like 2023. I was like, wait, what? We're like, oh yeah, we're living in the future. I was
We're in the future.
So cool. But I like how selective you are with the type of clients you bring on. You know, you know this kind of certain market specifically, and it seems like you're probably most comfortable with those folks too.
Yeah.
Was that all taken from like the Facebook days and getting to know those style businesses?
Yeah, I think part of it was getting to know like physical products and how they work through e-com, a little bit through retail distribution as well. That I think more than even just getting to know it, it's what gets me excited. There's something about like physical, especially consumable products that's really unique to me. The trust that someone places in you to feed them is like pretty intense. And so I think about like the snack category a lot. And you walk into a grocery store, there's 20,000 different things. Yeah. Just that like trust of a consumer to pick something new at the shelf is like a huge burden. And so I get really interested by the CPG category, by D2Cs, because it's a very personal purchase decision. I think SaaS and all this kind of stuff is really exciting today. And there's like high valuations and all that cool stuff. But to me, it's less personal of a decision. It's something that I can not as immediately empathize with. And so I get really excited about consumer facing. And the second part of our positioning is, you know, we work with like founder-led brands specifically. And that's just, you know, comes from, again, like one of my goals is really to build out a network of like-minded folks. And I think founders have this like inherent optimism of, I've never done this before. This is a huge category. It's $1 billion, has major market leaders, but I'm just going to do it better than them. Yeah. And that's like a mentality that I really admire and you know, think of myself through. And so, yeah, that's part of why we just want to connect with founder-led brands specifically in this kind of growth stage.
That's I like the whole optimism kind of framing of it because, yeah, it's very easy to kind of get into the negative spin of like, oh, shiny objects and all that stuff. But it is layered with like, or maybe encapsulated with optimism because we all think we have these abilities or curiosity. And it's fun, and then when you get a whole bunch of people, it's like this group think or mastermind where you can all riff off. Like you might have some ideas on some side, we do on others. And it's like, shoot, you can make something cool out of this. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it'll go somewhere. It's a thing that we'll create into the world, especially if it's physical too.
Yeah, and I think at that stage, it's also what's cool is it's less about like the 10% optimization or you have a 5% improvement in your ROAS. Like that's not really what's going to make a difference there. But it's about these like step changes of like, does our product really meet our customers' needs? Is our positioning actually showing up in the way we think it is? Do customers really resonate with this? And those kind of like bigger questions are really exciting to me. So even when we're doing just something like Facebook ads, the lens I'm kind of thinking about it through is like, okay, well, is our messaging really resonating with this audience? Because at this stage, we don't even have a good sense of like who our target is. So, we can't make all these assumptions that it's like 35 plus woman and she really likes yoga and acro yoga, whatever it is. Like you kind of have to take a step back and unlock some of those learnings in this growth stage, which is really cool to me.
No, that's interesting. Well, I'm just I'm thinking like, because it seems like you got to be tapped in with a lot of stuff. I mean, you mentioned a bunch of stuff in the news and things you're always thinking of, like you mentioned how Apple's getting in advertising, Netflix is doing some interesting stuff, these big brands now, there's a lot of shifts. I was just kind of curious, like, where do you keep up with, like, what do you pay attention to keep your finger on the pulse, like the news or like YouTube videos?
I'm actually not a big news guy. I think, again, like with this like theme of optimism, like the news cycle today to me is very inherently negative and has a pessimistic outlook on the world. And so most of where I consume things is through conversations with friends, through YouTube, through a lot of like blogs or Substacks or things like that. I'm probably like I'm a pretty crazy newsletter subscriber. I'm like a serial subscriber to newsletters. And
what are your Substacks? I mean, there's a whole bunch of good ones on there.
Lately, I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but Stratcherry or Stratacherry, it's with a CH, one of my favorites. He just talks about like a lot of frameworks, business models, like, and that's kind of this, I'm really interested in like mental frameworks as well and how you make decisions and things like that, which is kind of what he goes into. Also really interested in 2 p.m., which is like a newsletter about productivity and kind of finding the best way to work and operational efficiency and this kind of stuff. I like D2C Plus, which is a D2C newsletter by the agency Pilot House, which I think they're great and they do cool stuff. Big fan of Trends, The Hustle, like all of this kind of entrepreneurship, dissecting business model, like a lot of these folks. So yeah, honestly, the list goes on and on. Twitter is another huge place I consume a lot of information. I'm very active. I'm trying to be more active as a poster, but I'm very active as a consumer. There's a lot of cool information on the internet, and I got some good advice recently, which was, if you're reading a book, by the time you finish the book, it's probably out of date. Unless it's like a really, unless you're reading like Lean Product Playbook or like something like that, probably is as much, if not more value in finding sources that are quicker to the punch and have quicker reaction times to everything that's changing in the world today.
Yeah, I like that angle. I like that way of thinking of it. Well, let's talk about some of the like the trends and what, like where your predictions would be for the future. But where I want to start with that is probably the one that's biggest on our mind lately, which is, Apple iOS 14.5 update made it so that, you've got to give permission to collect data. I know with Google Chrome now, it's actually dropping Facebook's Pixel if it discovers the Pixel on Google Chrome. All of this kind of stuff is happening with the pixels and the cookies and the third-party cookies getting dropped by these apps. Where do you see advertising and retargeting and sort of attribution tracking for conversions? Like, where do you see all that stuff going with all of these companies basically, closing their gates?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple answers here. It also kind of depends on the horizon you're looking at. So maybe let's take this from a few different angles. So one is kind of like today, what's happening and what can you do? So like you mentioned, iOS 14.5 is essentially, to put it in a more simplistic way, is blocking Facebook Pixel from connecting the dots on who purchased it and attributing that purchase to Facebook. And then with iOS 15, they're probably going to be doing the same thing with email, where now actually, if you put in your email, Apple will let you kind of censor it and that they won't be able to see if you've opened the email or, any kind of metric like that. And so that creates downstream implications for your retargeting strategy through email. Did this person actually view our discount code? Is it worthwhile sending it again or not? So there are a lot of these kind of changes happening. Like you mentioned, there's also, blocking servers through web browsers and all that stuff. Today, probably the biggest change this has is not really to performance yet, but just to attribution. Mm-hmm. So what that really means is just finding new ways of attributing success. Some of this turns into kind of like, if it's working, it's good enough. If our media is efficient versus our revenue, it's 30% of revenue or 20% of revenue. We know we're in a healthy spot and we can continue to spend, and what we're doing is probably working. And if not, maybe we take a more experimental kind of test and control methodology. We turn off a channel for 3 weeks, we turn it back on and see what the impact is. And that's the kind of stuff that marketers should have been doing more of. Mm-hmm. And that we would recommend a lot on Facebook to do, like experimental tests. Test something in one geo, test it in the geo with similar baseline sales and compare the difference. Because that's truly like how you should be making decisions in this world. But because there is kind of like the attribution on Facebook, there was no need to do that. So some of this today is just back to fundamentals, like good marketing practices. Write down what your test is, monitor it for 2 weeks, write down the results, and do that another 8 times to actually understand what strategies are effective, right? Like that will always be the best attribution, quote unquote, method that you have. Where this goes in the medium term is more like I would call product roadmap. So on Facebook side, well, let's first talk about Shopify. Like Shopify just released all this stuff where now the conversions API won't just send back a purchase event. Shopify won't tell Facebook, hey, here's a purchase that just happened on our site. You should probably attribute it to XYZ person. But it'll also say, here's someone who viewed this piece of content. Here's someone who added to cart. Here's someone who landed on the homepage. So Shopify's willingness to work with Facebook is obviously in a self-interested way, but it leads to a much smarter data ecosystem that isn't relying on browser pixels, but is more like server-to-server connection. That still doesn't help with iOS 14, but it helps with a lot of this like Chrome extension type stuff. Right. Where Facebook is probably going to take this, and this is a little bit of my guess, but where I think Facebook is probably headed is driving more in-app purchase behavior through Facebook Shops and Instagram Shops. So a lot of my clients now are getting emails from Facebook saying, hey, we'll give you a $2,000 ad coupon just to set up your Instagram shop. And the reason being, they're probably going to want you to start driving ads to your Instagram shop because then they can attribute it within the app itself to that profile. Yeah. And so this kind of ladders into a broader conversation around like where are tech companies headed and what does it really mean to be a tech company anymore? Or even like a social media company. Like, is Facebook a social media network or is it an e-commerce network? To me, the future of Instagram is not competing with TikTok, but it's competing with Amazon. And that's kind of how I think about their product roadmap. So that's like one midterm thing that's super compelling to me, is just like setting up the infrastructure today so that you can take advantage of some of these new behaviors that these platforms will incentivize. TikTok is probably going to do the same thing where you can buy within the app. Today they barely have like a conversion tracking pixel and all this stuff, but they're all kind of headed in this direction of like, we know searches start on Amazon and that's turned into a huge issue for our business. And so we're going to make more searches start in app through Facebook Marketplace or Instagram shopping or whatever. If you even open up your Instagram, you can see how they've moved the UI. So it's less emphasis on posting. That's no longer the middle button at the bottom, but it's actually the shop tab.
Ah, interesting.
So I think UI can clue you into a lot of like future product roadmap. And that's something I saw last week that was pretty interesting to me.
I guess that makes sense because they're probably testing, right? They're testing some future goal that they have or some direction they're trying to take their platform. So they're like, let's see what people think about this thing. Are they going to start using it more?
Yeah. And you also notice that those platforms tend to reward the early adopters of their new features as well, as far as like additional reach and things like that. So I think that's always a good thing to keep an eye on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's just like, it's really the only move they have to respond to these kind of changes. So it's less a hypothesis, it's more just like, this is what I would do if I was sitting in that chair at Instagram.
So you don't think there's something that's going to like replace cookies and sort of fill the same need that cookies used to?
I think it's possible, but at the end of the day, like, we know that Apple is going to try to get into advertising.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing for Facebook to say, let's try to protect our market share on advertising. It's another thing for them to say, well, let's try to actually make a different move, gain more market share by opening up a whole new like product suite. And so I think a lot of these companies will take more of an offensive strategy, and instead of try to find like, because like a lot of this technology is pretty old now. UTMs are like 20 years old. This is like the primary tracking that we're all using as marketers. This is like so I think it's fair to say that some new technology will come out, but on the platform side, it probably makes more sense to try to incentivize in-app behavior because you're still controlling the user base.
Sure.
And you have like, you control the infrastructure at that point, which opens up new monetization in the future.
Well, we're also seeing Facebook. They announced a couple weeks ago, but it rolls out next week. They're rolling out like a podcasting platform right in Facebook where you can publish your podcast to to Facebook now, which to me seems like a kind of middle finger to Apple a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Big one.
And I think people don't like Apple's new UI on podcasting is what I've heard. So
I actually haven't seen it, never even looked at it, but I'm sure I wouldn't like it as well because it's different, and I don't like change.
Curmudgeon Matt. Well, then you have Spotify. Like Spotify rolled out, and I mean they rolled out some new live audio stuff yesterday. I think was Green Room, which I was playing around with that. It's like a Clubhouse alternative. I was like, well. And then Facebook's already experimenting that. Twitter Spaces. I mean, it is so interesting to see the platforms and how fast they can change if like there's like one thing hits, like a Clubhouse or a pandemic that forces change like that.
Yeah,
and then now
totally.
it just kind of becomes part of the new ecosystem we're all playing in.
Yeah. I have a bunch of thoughts on this, and I'd love to get into this. I have one more kind of comment on the iOS stuff that's going on. I think in the very long term, where I see this headed is brand over everything, brand marketing over any other kind of marketing. If you can afford it, building a distribution channel and building a brand is probably your best bet for the next, call it 10 to 15 years.
Sure.
The reason being, I think, with new tech, everything is becoming automated, everything's becoming replicated and duplicated and all this stuff. And so it would be pretty easy for me to launch any kind of company, I'd imagine, in 5 years, whether that is any kind of consumer facing good, whether that's coffee company or skincare or supplements. Like even now you can go online and find someone who will make personalized supplements for you, and you just put your sticker on it and you send it out. And so with manufacturing kind of becoming a race to the bottom and ads becoming more and more automated, that's also going to be a race to the bottom. You got to start thinking about like, where is the competitive advantage? Either you have a super innovative product, or you have a really compelling brand, or you own a customer base through content and all creator and all this kind of stuff. But those are really your three options. There's not going to be this kind of like arbitrage that there is more so in the past 5 years, but even today, there's still a little bit of arbitrage on Facebook, some skill set that you have that other folks don't have. In the future, it's going to be you put in your URL, you upload your image, and it just does everything else. AI comes up with the ad copy. They come up with the perfect conversion optimized landing page. Like all that stuff is going to happen. So really like your brand, your positioning, product market fit, like those are probably the levers you still have that I'd guess in 15 years from now.
Yeah.
Dude, that's a great prediction or observation because product, brand, and the people that you kind of have the attention of, you could do so much, but like as to your point, you have all these different things. I mean, just the fact that you have this agency now, you're surrounding yourself with different, product creators or brands that you now have the ability to. You have this network, you can create anything you want on the back of them as well. Kind of leveraging these connections, like you were saying, surrounding yourself. But it's power to have that influence and not really care so much about the other bits and pieces like a platform and ads and all that. Just make sure that you're keeping up, I guess.
Yeah, I think all that stuff will fall into place, right? And like if you're Mr. Beast and you have the right number of customers across the US, you can immediately turn on 20,000 locations of Mr. Beast burger restaurants from other folks fulfilling it, other folks making the product. Really all you need to do is have the brand in order to be able to monetize that. So I see like part of this is like a lot of like creator-led brands in the future. Today they're working with the creators are working with brands and acting as influencers and affiliates and all that stuff. At some point they'll go, hey, there's margin here that they're making that I'm not making. Why don't I just do this?
Yeah, and we've been studying the creator world a lot lately. The YouTubers, Mr. Beast, and there's some interviews on Noah Kagan's podcast we just listened to with his manager, and he's kind of saying the same thing. It's like these ones they're the production houses that are being created now, and those are the brands. They have products like you just mentioned, or maybe they're partnering with another person or company to make the products.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Mr. Beast gets enough. Well, he probably does now, but I actually think Mr. Beast is probably one of the most brilliant marketers of our time right now. Like the way he's doing it to market his stuff, I think is just next level to the way anybody else is doing marketing right now. The way he sort of natively weaves in the advertising for some of the sponsors that he's got. And I mean, I think it's brilliant. And I honestly think that's where the puck is going, right? I think it's this creator economy where the creators are the new celebrities, the new media channels, like the Mr. Beast manager was saying. Yeah. The guys like Mr. Beast aren't the next like Brad Pitt. Guys like Mr. Beast are the next Fox. They're the next Disney. They're the next they're the next media company. And I really think that thinking along those lines is really smart. And it's right along with what you're saying. Like brand is everything. Like build that brand because that's where you get that kind of control and power.
Yeah, I think it's so. And some of these guys are already doing it. To your point, like Dave Dobrik is launching an app a day. It seems like, and it's like
it's crazy.
Really if you can command the attention. It used to be that there were, and I actually saw an article about this recently. It used to be that there were very limited number of customers for a given market. So if you think about like early PCs, like only enterprise, that's your only customer. And so access to distribution is how you protect your business and how you grow your business. We have a sales team that can reach out to these 100 enterprise customers who are the only people in the world who are using computers. Everything about the internet has led to an inverse of that, where now distribution is not an input, it's an output of really good content and best-in-class product. And so like Facebook got to be big because they had the best kind of product. And that led to distribution that they can use to empower this whole ecosystem of advertising. Similarly, like someone like Dave Dobrik has the best content for his audience, which leads to him owning distribution, which leads to monetization opportunities for the brands and his own companies and whatever, all that stuff that happens in the background. So that kind of reversal to me of like distribution now being a privilege and not, this thing that you guard as a company is like that's a really interesting move that I think older business models like traditional agencies, traditional software companies are, not really able to keep up with in the same way.
Now, you made a comment before we hit record about how Netflix is getting into e-commerce. I'm curious how is Netflix getting into e-commerce?
Yeah, so Netflix just launched Netflix.shop, where this is like, initially, this is their version of Disney's merchandising efforts, where now you can go and buy a T-shirt from Stranger Things or some cool merch or toys or whatever. That's not really what I think is. I mean, there's one thing interesting about that, which is merchandising is a cool opportunity. It builds their brand. It's a good long-term play. I think what's more interesting to me is when Netflix announces that within Netflix.com, when you're watching a show, you can click on the product and then just go buy it on their shop. That's I think is probably the next move there in maybe like a couple of years. And that then becomes really interesting to me because now you're really Netflix versus Amazon becomes like a very possible comparison where they're both coming to this from a different angle. Amazon has started with the logistics and the infrastructure and is now layering content as a way to promote that. Netflix started with the content, has access to the distribution again, and is now layering in product to monetize that. And so it is it's interesting for me to see how all these tech companies, it seems like their business models are starting to converge in a way where it's like, we're just going to do a little bit of everything. We'll do some advertising. And it's cool that Netflix has really pronounced like they're never going to do advertising. Yeah. I think that's a really smart way to guard the brand. But it does lead to this question for me, which is like, what does it mean to be a brand in the future? If you're doing e-com and SaaS, Amazon, you're doing e-com, you're doing AWS, you're also doing entertainment, you're also a publisher, you own news channels and like all this different stuff.
They have physical storefronts too.
Yeah, grocery, you're doing grocery, like you're doing future tech, like sell driverless cars. It's like, well, what is the brand? Like, what do you stand for?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is like, it's an interesting move. I think it's also like a dangerous move. And it seems like Netflix knows a little bit about how to play that game, but I'm mostly just interested to see when I can like watch a show and just click to buy the bed, the pillow, the couch, like whatever's in the scene.
It's gonna be like that scene from Fight Club where he's like, it shows all the IKEA furniture that's around his house, and he's boop.
Yeah, I would like that.
Exactly.
Still frame. I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, platform thinking, man. It's just like you have this whole ecosystem, and I guess each platform has its own agendas and how they architect this thing based off of their product and user behavior. And it's fascinating to really kind of deep dive into how this is happening right now, but also like where the puck is going.
Yeah.
Like, where is this headed? And really kind of start to forecast a little bit and maybe try to position ourselves that way, because it's all things we can leverage, these platforms. And
well, the Netflix merch kind of thing is really smart. I mean, obviously Disney's done it for a long time really, really well. But if you also look at, coming back to Mr. Beast, I feel like he's done that really, really well as well. Like his largest revenue driver in his business is his MrBeast.com, right?
Sure.
His store where he sells all the shirts. And it's interesting because like he kind of learned that if he builds a tribe around his following, a tribe of people that will proudly wear his brand, like, literally on themselves all the time, then he's gonna grow, and more people are gonna want to be part of that tribe. And Disney figured that out a long time ago, more with like a lot of kids type stuff. But it sounds like Netflix is kind of doing the same thing around their TV shows. Like I'm in the Ozark tribe. Like I like Ozark. Look at my
creep.
Whatever. I can't even think of what his company is. Like my Charlie Bird. What's his name? Something Bird. But it's like it seems like they're actually kind of taking a page out of some of the YouTubers' books a little bit in that sense of like creating a tribe around the content they're creating.
I think you're right that like, essentially like clothing is the biggest like way to represent yourself as something. It's like really obvious signaling to other people that this is how I view myself. And that is just like so powerful for brands. So I've even seen a couple, beverage companies, snack companies launch some merch as an additional, not even as a revenue stream, but as a marketing channel.
Yeah.
Say, hey, we can build advocacy amongst our core group and spread word of mouth marketing by releasing some merch. So let's just do it at cost. Yeah. And that's like Nick Sharma talked about that a little bit, I think like early last year. And that also I think is just a great way to like simultaneously build the brand and build revenue.
And we have all the resources now that you can just print on demand or super cheap. And it's like, you
don't need to hold inventory.
You don't need to deal with it. Just send it to another platform that's handling all the shirts. I mean, it's like there's solutions for everything as long as you have the strategy.
Yeah. So what way do you see Apple getting into advertising? What do you think there is going to be like their entry into that world?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, this is probably the one I'm the least sure about. So it's, you caught me.
We won't call you out later if the prediction's wrong.
I appreciate that. I'm going to backtrack and say, no, well, I think there's like a couple of ways. So one, like Apple already has a suite of publishing products that looks and behaves pretty similar to Facebook's in-app publishing tools. So if you open an article in Facebook or in Apple, you'll still be within that Facebook or Apple interface, but now you're reading an article by, the Post or whatever it is. And so that's like one really obvious monetization opportunity where like you can now have little video or image ads within that content as like a way to sponsor it, breaking up the different paragraphs or something like that. I think there's also like an element here of like tech that has not quite been built out yet. So I'm not really sure where this is going, but I think it makes less sense. Like Apple's never going to be the company that puts an ad when you open up an iPhone because they're too premium to do something that obviously, lowbrow or like commoditized or whatever you want to call it.
Kindle.
Yeah. Right. Like there are companies that are going to do this, but it's not going to be Apple. Yeah. So then to me, it's kind of like, okay, well, they've got to build in new moments where there is like less obvious monetization. So I wouldn't really be surprised if there was something like an Apple Shop in the future that was an app that's already on your phone, that's included in the native OS, that's a destination for shopping based on behavior that Apple sees you doing.
Mhm.
And then they start to, similar to the search in the App Store, they start to sell like premium inventory and space and top search results and all that recommended editorial lists, like all this kind of stuff within that space. So I'm not really sure. I think there's a few places today where Apple could come out and start advertising, but it's probably going to be less around those because they don't represent this like step change in revenue that I think they're looking for from the side of the business. And I think it'll look like a new destination. I could be 100% wrong about this, but that's kind of how I would approach it. How I'm guessing they're looking at this.
I mean, that's kind of how they've always done everything too, right? They create a new destination for whatever their agenda is at the time. And, you know, they kind of point people that direction, you know, like with a new app, like you said, an iOS, a native app. And it's like, okay, now we're going to put more attention, kind of link it up to all the other parts of our platform.
And it's going to be forcibly shoved onto everybody's phone, whether
Yes.
they want it or not.
No, I don't want that on my home screen.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's what they did with news. It's, you know,
Yeah.
podcasts. Like this has kind of been the playbook. So
Yeah.
let's see. But shopping is a little bit harder to do than I think like a news poll. And I'm not like a tech expert. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems like the level of personalization is maybe a little more robust. Maybe not, but
Hey, I like the prediction. I can get on board with it.
nice.
we won't call you out, don't worry. But we'll call it the good.
Yeah, I mean, I could see them doing something in the podcast world as well, you know, with sponsorships on podcasts.
sure.
Well, they
Well,
already
they're
are
starting to. Yeah.
doing some premium podcasts where they're exclusive to Apple and stuff like that, which I'm sure Apple will probably, you know, monetize those in some
Well,
additional way.
yeah, they're allowing affiliate, like people like us who are promoters, to promote someone else's show and get part of that recurring income or revenue.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
wow.
subscription model. Yeah,
That's a new thing. So I mean, they're dabbling. They're definitely
Yeah.
trying some new stuff out, which is interesting.
yeah,
But,
for sure.
Yeah.
I just checked the time, and we're keeping you a little longer now. So got to be true to our word, my man. One last thing. I saw you mention it like a few different places, and kind of got the essence of like the agency. But like it's kind of like this thing of happiness is always kind of sprinkled throughout everything. And it's like you're just having a good time, and you know, it just feels like that's kind of like maybe the glue that keeps you motivated to do all this stuff. Like, do you have any like practices or something to kind of, I guess, keep your head on straight? Mental models?
A couple things. So one is just like, you know, kind of daily routine. That's been a big thing for me. I'm thinking about like what to focus on and what not to focus on. So I'll kind of talk about that. The second one that's also interesting is, yeah, in terms of mental models, is like how to think about things, like how to think about certain things. And I find that this is like very loose, but that leads to a greater level of happiness, or even like me feeling like I'm successful or something like that, than any kind of like revenue milestone or, you know, whatever external factors. So those have been kind of the two ways. So I'll start with the second. So, you know, one kind of example of this is when I first started with Friendly Flower, I was measuring revenue pretty much monthly, and I was looking to double revenue monthly. And we hit that for like probably 7 consecutive months. We just doubled revenue.
Nice.
And that got us to that run rate. And then I kind of took a step back and was like, well, this didn't really make me feel like any more successful. It kind of just feels like we grew too fast and the wheels are falling off. So now the way I've been thinking about this more in terms of like growth, not in a corporate environment, is to measure quarters. Like if it's a basketball game, you have 4 quarters. The first quarter really only comes after like a year and a half. And so now with like Reach Digital, for example, I don't even want to look up and say, oh, what did we achieve, until it's been like 2 years or so. And then I'll go, okay, the first quarter is over. What's the score? Are we in the game? Like, are we leading? Are we behind? But until then, it's like the equivalent of it being tip off. The other team has 1 point. Doesn't really mean you're going to lose the game. There's a whole lot left. So that's been one. It's just like adjusting timeframes and adjusting like what are the markers I'm using to indicate where I'm at and where I should be. The other kind of model I've been thinking about is like this: on the x-axis there is X, Y. On the horizontal axis, I think x-axis,
I think that's
there
X,
is on the right is like high impact, on the left is like low impact decision, and on the y-axis on the top is irreversible, and on the bottom is reversible. So if you have a high impact and irreversible decision, like I'm going to sell my business to you, that's a decision you should take a long time and think about. And so if you find yourself in that place, you're thinking about this for 6 months, 10 months, as long as that's the quadrant that you're in, take as much time as you need to. Like, if someone's looking to buy us out or something, like I'm going to really push that decision back until the last possible minute, because I want to have all the data. I know I can't make a change after I go through with this. If it's a high impact and very reversible decision, just pull the trigger and go for it. You need to get something out there now. And I kind of think about hiring that way. Like, if you need to hire someone, yes, there's an opportunity cost to hiring the wrong person, but more so there's a bigger opportunity cost to hiring no one.
True.
And just having no one do the work. And so it's like, just get someone in the door. If they're wrong, unfortunately, like that is what it is, and you'll have to make changes, but at least you've like kind of got an at bat, and you're not just like sitting back. So this is like, and the other two quadrants don't really matter as much, but if it's low impact, low, like reversible, just do whatever, like delegate it, like give it to someone else, don't do it. It doesn't really matter. If it's like irreversible, low impact, just do it as quickly as you can. 5 p.m. at the end of the day, just like get it done and log off. Again, doesn't really matter. So some of these like frameworks have been really helpful for me, and just thinking about like, where am I focusing my time? It should really be that top right quadrant. That should be where I'm spending my mental effort. And then that bottom right quadrant should be where I'm doing a lot of like my, like $1,000 an hour work of like, this is impactful stuff. It matters to my clients. But maybe I don't need to think about it for 8 years, whether or not we're going to launch this ad or something. Like, let's just do it and see if it works,
I love that.
So that's been a really helpful framework for me. And then the other side of this, like just day-to-day wise, I think this has been the hardest struggle for me, but learning to like log off is really big. I'm sure you guys have dealt with this, and it's like the most tried and true thing. But I find that when I spend 8-9 hours just thinking about something, if I just go to sleep, the next morning I'll probably have an answer.
Sure. Take a nap or whatever, walk.
Yeah, right? Like go for a walk or something. And in that moment, you're so like tunnel vision and you're so focused that it just doesn't make sense to not think about it. But it's actually like you've reached the point of diminishing returns. There's no incremental impact that's going to be generated from this.
But we're so optimistic that we're going to figure it out. So
you're like, I'm 1 minute away. I just
it's the freaking mind. Yeah, you're right. It plays tricks on us, man. So.
Yeah, it does. I think checking myself has been like a big theme for me. Is like, check how often you're trying to see progress. Check yourself on how hard you're working, and is that really driving to your goals and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, because I find myself checking, stats and stuff like that, whatever it is on, even though I know we have like reports and all this stuff, I'm still like, even like we take Wednesdays off typically. So yesterday I was just like, okay, let's like, and I would catch myself, why the hell am I checking stat? There is absolutely no intention. Like,
I even messaged him on Slack yesterday when he responded. In my head, I'm like, why are you even responding to me? But
like, no reason. Like, oh, it's gonna be important. It's like, no. But that's a common struggle I'm sure everyone can relate to in some way. But I love that, man.
I think it's easier said than done, right?
For sure. Well, Archit, man, we covered, I don't know how many rabbit holes, but I feel like we covered them all.
Yeah, no, this was amazing. So anybody listening to this, your company is called Reach Digital. Where's the best place to go check it out? And, if any social medias you want people to follow you on, now's a good time to shout them out.
Yeah, totally. We're reach-digital.co. You can check us out there. Probably the best way to get in touch with us is just shoot me a message on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on both of those. I'm about to be a lot more active on both of those. So also could be a cool place to get some insights. And I'm pretty much an open book. So would love for anyone to reach out and, happy to chat about anything that I'm interested in that you're also interested in, or give advice or whatever I can do to help.
Man, this has been fun. So thank you for spending the time, man. Enjoy the rest of San Diego.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate all the recommendations. It is.
Man. All right, man. Appreciate you.
Cool. Take care, guys.